Like many people, I read The Inheritance Cycle as a young teen and I fell in love with it. So recently I decided to travel back to the world of Alagasia. Hello and welcome to my channel. My name's Cassie and I would like to start a series called Tea and a Book, where I drink tea and talk about a book with y'all. Today's tea is a Jasmine tea, which is in a Baby Yoda mug, and today's book is going to be Eragon by Christopher Paolini. Today's video is going to be a long one, so grab a drink, some tea perhaps, and get cozy. I read Eragon so that you don't have to. Our story begins with a prologue called Shade of Fear, and as it suggests, there is a shade, but there are also two urgals. They are waiting in the forest to ambush three elves. When they do, two are killed instantly, but one is alive and makes a run for it. The shade follows the third elf, and then as he's going to blast her with a fireball, there is a flash of emerald light, and the stone that the elf was carrying disappears, and the elf goes unconscious. Dun dun dun! What a prologue. Chapter 1 begins, as so many fantasy series do, with a young child hunting to provide for their family. I don't know why this is a theme, but you see it all the time. This particular young boy is named Eragon, the name of the book. He's kind of important, and he is 15 years old. I think it's also important to note he was hunting in an area called the Spine, which is like an area of mountain ranges that people don't really like to go into. It's considered dangerous, mysterious, not a place you want to be. Suddenly, there's an explosion, and at the center of it is sitting a blue stone. Wonder what that could be. Bro took 1 second to consider his actions, and then he snatched the stone up thinking, oh, I could sell it. I mean, the stone only appeared in like a dangerous, mysterious mountain range. It's probably fine. After not really catching much, Eragon decides to take the stone and head back to his family farm. On his way, however, he stops at the town called Carvajal. Here he stops at a butcher shop owned by a guy named Sloan, thinking that he could trade the stone for some of the meat he has. Sloan, however, is low-key a jerk and just refuses to trade with him, which, okay, honestly, I kind of get, considering I'm pretty sure Sloan's wife died in the Spine, so I get it. I wouldn't want to trade with Eragon either, but Sloan's still a jerk, okay? We don't like him. Luckily, Horst, which is the town's blacksmith, and Katrina, which is Sloan's daughter, step in and help Eragon out. Horst pays for Eragon's food. In return, Eragon promises to help out at the forge in a few coming months or whatever. Eragon leaves Carvajal, makes it back to his family farm safely, where he shows the stone that he found to his uncle Garrow. Here we learn that Eragon lives with his uncle Garrow and his cousin Roran. I love Roran, okay? I love him. Also, some more context. Eragon has no idea who his father is. None whatsoever. The only thing that he knows about his mother is, 1, that her name was Selena, and 2, that when Eragon was just a little baby, she came to Garrow and begged Garrow to take Eragon and then disappeared into the wind, never to be seen again. So, he doesn't have much for parents, but Garrow and Roran became family to him. Time passes without much happening, and the first snow of the year arrives. And along with the snow, a bunch of traders come into Carvajal to, trade various goods. Eragon, Roran, and Garrow go into Carvajal to sell some produce, buy some things for themselves, trade. I remember that fancy blue stone that Eragon found? Yeah. Well, he was hoping to trade it, or to sell it at least, but no one wanted to take it. And he found out a couple weird things. 1, that the stone is hollow, which is odd. And 2, it's like completely unbreakable. They take a hammer to it, not a dent, not a scratch. Ultimately, the trader that was looking at the stone said, it's not worth it. Don't know how much it's worth, so I'm not going to buy it and take the risk. So Eragon still has his stone. Eragon goes about and enjoys the traders being there. He goes around shops, buys some candy. Eventually, he makes his way to go listen to some traders talking about news from the outside world, outside of Carvajal. Basically, they're saying that there's a lot of trouble brewing and that only the King Galbatorix, can save them. The traders also talk about a group called the Varden and how they have no interest in helping them out. They say, all they want to do is overthrow the king and take possession of your land. They have spies everywhere as they prepare to invade. You never know who might be working for them. Eragon did not fancy this message, and so he said, How do you know this? I can say the clouds are green, but that doesn't make it true. Prove that you aren't lying. To this, the traitor responds, aren't your children taught respect, or do you let boys challenge men whenever they want to? Honestly, go Eragon for stepping in and being like, yeah, prove you aren't lying. Bro, my social anxiety? No, thank you. Here's where we learn that the Varden are a rebel group who essentially attack the Empire. They're against the Empire. Later, Eragon listens to more tales, except for this time it's from the local storyteller, Brom. And Brom straight up tells Galbatorix, the king's, villain origin story. Essentially, Galbatorix used to be part of a group called the Dragon Riders. They were formed to keep peace. Unfortunately, Galbatorix's dragon was killed, which is honestly very sad. I do sympathize with him, but then he was driven to madness. So he, with the help of this guy named Morzan and 12 others called the Forsworn, attacked all the other riders and stole a dragon named Shruikan. I could be very wrong on that pronunciation, but we're just gonna call him Shruikan. Garrow tells Eragon that he is very lucky to have heard this tale because Brom could literally be killed for this, for just reciting what happened. Back on the farm, Eragon is just trying to get some nice sleep when the stone begins moving and squeaking. Eragon takes a second to check it out and then ultimately decides, I'm gonna go back to bed, which honestly, respect. I would be terrified out of my mind if there was something moving around in my room, but nah. He's just like, I'll figure it out in the morning. The stone, however, had other plans. It continued to move and squeak, and out popped a dragon. Y'all, I thought that this was just an ordinary stone. Caught me by surprise. The dragon looked at Eragon for a second and then just continued to explore the room. Honestly, this baby dragon would be so adorable. I want one. Then Eragon decided to reach out and touch it. He struggled to move, but was unable to. After what seemed like hours, warmth seeped back into his limbs, leaving them tingling. Shivering uncontrollably, he pushed himself upright. His hand was numb, his fingers paralyzed. Alarmed, he watched as the middle of his palm shimmered and formed a diffused white oval. Just pocket that piece of information, it'll come back later. Eragon took his new dragon out into the woods and began to feed it, take care of it, whatever. Time passed and it grew at a very rapid rate, and Eragon could feel a connection with the dragon, like a mind connection, and he could communicate a little bit with the dragon, kind of like impress certain ideas onto the dragon, like stay here. He could talk with it. Curious to learn more, Eragon goes into town with Roran and decides to talk to Brom because, you know, Brom, the storyteller, of course he would know stuff about dragons, and also Brom and Eragon are pretty good friends. Eragon learns a bit about the history of the dragons and also that because he's a writer, he is going to have a longer life. Also, Eragon, he thought that he was so slick by asking his questions. He was like, yeah, a trader that I met with told me about some of this stuff. Could I ask a bit more? Bro thought he was slick. One last thing before he leaves Brom, he wanted to find a name for his dragon. So he asked Brom, what are some names of some pretty, cool dragons in the past? And Brom lists a whole bunch of names. And then at the end, he whispers under his breath, Saphira. And then Eragon leaves. Eragon meets back up with Roran and they start to head back to their farm. And then Roran says that he has some exciting news. He was offered a job in a town called Theransford, which isn't too far away, and he wants to take the job so that he can save up money to marry Katrina. Isn't that so cute? I love romance. Eragon is not very happy about this news. And so he goes and rants about it to his dragon. After ranting, he's like, you know what? You need a name. So he starts naming names that Brom suggested to him. And the whole time the dragon is kind of giggling in a dragon way, one might say. And after a second, he realizes, I've been picking all guy names. You are a girl. How about Saphira? And she's like, dope. I love it. So there we go. Now her name's Saphira. Sadly, it is time for Roran to depart. His father, Garrow, gives him a father's blessing, and then Eragon and Roran head out to Carvajal, where he is going to meet the person who will take him to Theransford for the job. Roran is like, hey, are you going to stay with me until I leave? And Eragon's like, bro, there's literally nothing for me to do. I'm just gonna leave. For as sad as he was, because let me tell you guys, he was very upset about Roran leaving, and for as sad as he was, he skedaddled out of there. While walking around Carvajal, Eragon sees Sloan, you know, the butcher, the guy we don't like him, sees Sloan talking to two creepy looking people. Sloan leaves and the two spot Eragon. Suddenly, he's frozen in place. He can't move. He starts to low-key freak out, but then, luckily, Brom walks up. Good old Brom, and saves him. They have a brief conversation, and then as they are ready to depart, Brom offers him a hand. Eragon shook it, but as he let go, something in Brom's hand caught on his mitt and pulled it off. It fell to the ground. The old man picked it up. "Clumsy of me," he apologized, and handed it back. As Eragon took the mitt, Brom's strong fingers wrapped around his wrist and twisted sharply. His palm briefly faced upward, revealing the silvery mark. "The one from earlier, like that the dragon gave him." Brom's eyes glinted, but he let Eragon yank his hand back and jam it into the mitt. "Goodbye," Eragon forced out, perturbed, and hurried down the road. Behind him, he heard Brom whistling a merry tune. I think Brom knows that something's up. Eragon is having a chat with Saphira, and he starts to mention the two creepy people that he saw in an alley, and Saphira freaks the freak out. She blocks out everything Eragon is trying to say, picks him up, and starts flying as fast as possible. Saphira lands in the spot where, coincidentally, Eragon first found her egg. As soon as she lands, Eragon basically falls off of her because his legs were severely injured. I mean, he wasn't riding in a saddle or anything, so he had nothing to protect his legs, so they are all, like, scratched up from her scales, like, bleeding terribly. Eragon does eventually convince Saphira to fly back to the farmhouse, but when they make it, they find it completely destroyed. Eragon races in and finds Garrow and digs him out of the wreckage, but Garrow is not in good shape. He makes like a litter and puts Garrow on it, and then Saphira starts to fly them back to Carvajal. But because they don't want Saphira to be detected by those of Carvajal, eventually she sets Garrow down and Eragon picks him up and continues the walk to Carvajal. He's walking along the path, he spots Brom, and then he passes out. Eragon awakes 2 full days later, and Garrow is not in good shape. His injuries are not healing. Eragon is questioned by a bunch of townsfolk, including Horst and his sons, and they're like, "Bro, what happened?" And he claims he wasn't there when the house was destroyed, which is true. But he also claims that he doesn't know how he got the injuries on his legs, which is false. But, you know, he couldn't give away the fact that he literally has a dragon. Everyone does their best to try to heal Garrow, but unfortunately, his wounds will not heal, and he passes away. Why am I about to cry? You don't know this character very long, but it made me really sad. And yeah, Eragon is also very sad. Completely understandable. But he also decides he wants revenge. So, of course, he sneaks away and he starts stealing supplies. He steals some meat from Sloan, which, if you're going to steal from anyone, might as well be Sloan. And he steals from leather to eventually make a saddle for Saphira. And then as he's about to leave, someone is there, and that someone is Brom. Brom, of course, knows about Saphira's existence, but not only does he know about her existence, he actually spoke with her. Apparently, this isn't something that just Eragon can do, it's something that Brom can do as well. Brom insists on coming along with Eragon, and he says he already wrote a note to Roran, kind of explaining some of the stuff that happened. Not the fact that Eragon has a dragon, but just that, like, his father died. And the 3 hit the road. The 3 being Saphira, Eragon, and Brom. Put on your adventure hat because we are traveling. Yes, I will be legitimately wearing this hat. I will accept no critiques on this hat. It is my favorite hat. Thank you. As they travel, Brom teaches Eragon some very important and valuable life lessons, such as how to make a saddle for your dragon, which Brom conveniently knows how to do. He also teaches Eragon that stealing is okay. No, I'm serious. Eragon says, "I don't have any money, and I don't want to steal again. It's wrong." "That depends on your point of view," corrected Brom, with a slight smile. Before you set out on this venture, remember that your enemies, the Razac, are the king's servants. They will be protected wherever they go. Laws do not stop them. In cities, they'll have access to abundant resources and willing servants. Also, keep in mind that nothing is more important to Galbatorix than recruiting or killing you, though word of your existence probably hasn't reached him yet. The longer you evade the Razac, the more desperate he'll become. He'll know that every day you'll be growing stronger and that each passing moment will give you another chance to join his enemies. You must be very careful, as you may easily turn from the hunter to the hunted. So stealing good or no? Brom also tells Eragon about Garrow's killers. They are called the Razac. The Razac are the king's servants. They are not to be trifled with. At this time, Brom also gifts Eragon a sword named Zar'roc. Zar'roc is dope, okay? Here's a picture of it. It looks so cool. They make a pit stop in Therinsford to buy 2 horses. One of them is named Snowfire, which I picture to be just like Shadowfax. No one can convince me otherwise. He is Shadowfax. And another horse which Eragon names Caddock. Also, just a fun note, Brom pays like 200 crowns for these horses. Where is he getting the funds to do this? And Bro claims to just be a storyteller. Okay. Brom also takes the traveling time as an opportunity to teach Eragon sword fighting, which is very helpful. He does this by throwing him a stick and saying, "Defend yourself." Page 114. Like, I'm sure he taught him some stances and moves and, like, forms and stuff, but in my mind, he just threw the stick at Eragon, said, "Defend yourself," and then his training consisted him of just whacking Eragon until he could block his moves, which is hilarious. Eventually, they need to stop for supplies, so they stop at a town called Yazuak, but it's a little quiet. A little too quiet. As they continue to travel through Yazuak, they discover a mountain of bodies. Every person from this town had been killed. The description of this is actually so sad. I'm laughing because I'm sad and uncomfy, not because it's funny. Before they can make it out of the town, they are attacked by 2 urgals, which, if you'll remember, are the orc-like creatures. Brom is injured, and in an attempt to save himself, Eragon shouts Brazinger, which lights his arrow on fire with a blue fire and shoots the urgals. He successfully kills them, but is left very drained. Brom tells Eragon that he used magic, and it's also very impressive that Eragon could do this for his age and knowledge. This is also where pretty much the whole magic system is laid out, and I will explain it to the best of my abilities. Magic is essentially controlled by something called the ancient language. If a person knows the true name of something or the ancient language name of something, then he has control over it. So when Eragon shouted Brazinger, that was the true name for fire, and so he had control over fire and was able to light the arrows on fire. But be careful, because magic takes as much energy to do a task as it would to normally do a task. So if you're throwing a pebble with magic, it would take not a lot of energy. But if you throw a boulder with magic, it would take a lot more energy from the person. Once a word is said and the magic is released, it cannot be undone even if it kills the person. So you really got to be careful that you don't take on a task that's too difficult, because there's no turning back. To recap, magic is limited by a person's knowledge of the ancient language and by their physical strength. Eragon, of course, desires to learn magic, as one would, and so Brom decides to teach him by starting with a pebble. He would have the pebble in his hand and tell him to lift it up using magic, all like Elphaba style, like from Wicked. You know what scene I'm talking about? Yeah. Soon, the 3 reach a town called Darrett, and of course, Saphira stays outside while Brom and Eragon go in. Fortunately, there are people who are alive here. Unfortunately, they are really not in the mood for visitors. The town is living in fear of urgals and bandits and just generally dying, but they agree that if Eragon and Brom stay where they are, that someone from the town will go and collect all the supplies that they want, and then they can pay them for said supplies and then be on their merry way. Trevor, the somewhat leader of the people there, asks Brom to deliver a message to Dras Leona. He says, When you enter Drasleona, would you do us all this favor? Alert the Empire to our plight and that of our other towns. If word of this hasn't reached the king by now, it's cause for worry. And if it has and he has chosen to do nothing, that too is cause for worry. We will carry your message. May your swords stay sharp, said Brom. With that, they depart from Darrett. And of course, Brom uses this little moment in Darrett as a teaching moment for Eragon. He says that Eragon could have used magic to sense the intentions of those of the townfolk. But he also says that Eragon should never go into people's minds unless absolutely necessary, as it is a man's last sanctuary. That is right, Eragon can go into people's minds, but that means that people can also go into his mind. So Brom also teaches him how to block people out. He says to do this, you have to focus on one thing and one thing only. So if you focus on a brick wall, that's all that they're going to encounter. Another thing to mention, Eragon has not flown on Saphira ever since their first flight, all those many moons ago. And so Saphira's kind of pissed about it. She's like, come on, we're gonna go fly. And he begrudgingly faces his fears. He is scared at first, but then he learns flying is actually really enjoyable. And they also learn that they can meld their minds together. So as he's flying on Saphira melds their mind together, and so he can see through her eyes, which is dope. Just read this chapter with the song from How to Train Your Dragon. It makes it better. As Eragon is flying, he senses a touch on his mind, and the touch is not Saphira. So he does what Brom taught him, and he tries to block it out. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. Fortunately, it's Brom, and Brom is very angry. Brom is like, don't you dare block me out of your brain again. Get down here. I have something I want to show you. Y'all, talking through your mind would be so helpful. Phones are great, don't get me wrong. But, if I could just directly communicate to someone with my brain, that'd be dope. It's like Lady Galadriel in The Lord of the Rings. Yeah, no, that'd be cool. Just a quick reminder that this whole time, while they've been traveling, they've been tracking the Razac to kill them, to avenge Garrow. And once Saphira lands, Eragon joins Brom, and they see weird marks on the ground. And they conclude that the Razac now have flying steeds. So they're going to be almost impossible to track because there won't be any footprints to track. Except one of them dropped a flask of seifer oil, which Eragon discovers really hurts if you pour it all over your hand. Eragon has the idea that if they track the seifer oil to where it was being delivered, then maybe they can find out where the Razac live, which is honestly kind of a smart plan. So they head to Tirm, where a bunch of trading records are held. And it also happens to be the home of Brom's friend, Jode. They make it to Tirm, and Saphira is once again left outside as the other two go in, and Saphira is not very happy about it. Eragon notes that Tirm looks ready for war. And this has nothing to do with the plot, but I think that the layout of the city is really cool. Basically, it has shorter buildings closer to the wall and taller buildings further back so that archers can stand on the taller buildings and shoot down. Anyways, I think that's cool. I like that layout. Anyways, they enter Tirm, and they decide they need to have different names. They can't go as Brom and Eragon. So they decide that Brom should go as Neil, and Eragon should go as Evan, Neil's nephew. So they make their way in, and they're looking for Brom's friend, Jode, and where he lives. And so they go into a tavern, and this guy has nothing to do with the plot, but they meet this really nice guy named Martin. I love this guy. He was just so friendly. He was like, yeah, everyone knows where Jode lives. Sure, I can point it out. Friendly Martin tells Brom and Eragon, or should I say Neil and Evan, that Jode lives next to a shop owned by Angela the herbalist. He also tells them that Jode's ships have been attacked because Jode is a merchant, and each of the ships that he's been sending out with supplies keep getting attacked, and no one's ever seen again. So that's not good for Jode. They say their thank yous and head out to find Angela's shop. And this is where we meet Angela. Angela, she's an interesting character. For example, here are her thoughts on frogs and toads. No, you don't understand. If I prove toads don't exist, then this is a frog and never was a toad. Therefore, the toad you see now doesn't exist. And if I can prove there are only frogs, then toads won't be able to do anything bad, like make teeth fall out, cause warts, and poison or kill people. Also, witches won't be able to use any of their evil spells because, of course, there won't be any toads around. This is not a one-time thing. This is like her life mission. Anyways, it's a very short interaction. But then Angela kindly points them in the direction of Jode's house. They knock on the door and Jode's wife, Helen, answers. And she is not terribly polite, but it's whatever. Helen reluctantly fetches Jode for them. By the way, Jode hasn't seen Brom for like 20 years. He thinks Brom's dead. So yeah, Jode was surprised and excited to see Brom. So they needed a quiet place to chat, and so they head through the town, and they head to this like castle fortress thing. Basically, the Lord of Tyrim decreed that all business owners must have their headquarters in said castle fortress thing. So they think it's a safe place to go and have a little chat. Catch up, it's been 20 years. That's longer than Eragon's been alive. Eragon is very excited to actually learn something about Brom's past, because he's been pretty secretive up until now. But, of course, Brom and Jode start speaking in riddles, and they start talking about our friends and the thing we were searching for. They don't want Eragon to know what they're talking about. But Brom does share with Jode that they are looking for the records of the oil to track down the Razac. But then Brom's like, hey, Eragon, could you go check on the horses? Like, I don't think I tied mine tight enough. Could you go, like, check them out, make sure they're okay? Nah, he just wanted to get rid of Eragon, and Eragon knows it, and he's not happy about it. So then when Eragon reaches the horses, he remembers, oh my gosh, magic. I was taught a word where I can eavesdrop on conversations. It's perfect. So he takes this opportunity to use what he learned and eavesdrop on the conversation. And basically what he hears is that there's this place called Trondheim that Brom says he doesn't want to take Eragon to for a few months or maybe even a year. He also mentions names that Eragon does not recognize, such as Ajahad and Islanzadi. They become kind of important later, so don't forget those, or do. I'll remind you. Brom asks Jode if he can use one of Jode's messengers to send a note to Ajahad, and to prove that it's actually Brom, he sends his ring with the messenger. The two rejoin Eragon down by the horses, and they're like, oh, are the horses okay? And Eragon was like, yeah, just peachy. And then they decide to head to the tavern to have a nice little meal. Eragon is very happy to eat food from a tavern and not from traveling on the road. And then afterwards he goes and decides to check on Saphira, who is, like I said, outside of the town. While he's out there meeting Saphira, he decides he wants to climb this huge rock face to meet her at the top. And he gets stuck about halfway. And it's kind of funny, low-key. And he would have been stuck there forever or died, but Saphira helped him out. They have an ordinary conversation about, whether or not they should trust Jode, and they conclude if Brom trusts him, so do we. And then Eragon heads back into town, just barely making it before the doors close. Brom, Eragon, and Jode begin to talk about their plan for looking at the Seether oil records. And this is when we learn a beautiful piece of information. Eragon never learned how to read. So he is going to be a little unhelpful for this little adventure. Brom just decides, okay, we'll teach ya. Right before bed, Eragon goes and asks Brom some more magic questions. He asks if it's possible to see something far away. And Brom informs him that that is called scrying. I will explain this to the best of my ability. Essentially, if you have seen someone, something, or someplace before, you can use magic to scry it. But you have to know what exactly you want to look at in order to look at it. So if someone wanted to scry their brother and they know exactly what they look like, they can do that. But if their brother is in a place where they've never been before, they won't see the surrounding area. They will only be able to see the person themselves. They also talk about King Galbatorix and how he probably won't kill Roran. Probably. Not until he knows what side Eragon's choosing, because he doesn't want to provoke Eragon to go join the Varden. So he'll probably keep Roran alive. For now. That is, if Galbatorix even knows about Roran's existence. He might not, The next day, Eragon decides to have a little look around town, and he ends up back at Angela's shop. Once he's in there, he hears a voice in his head, and at first, of course, he thinks it's Saphira, but it's not. Nor is it Brom. No, this voice is coming from a cat. More specifically, a werecat named Solumbum. Solumbum somehow knows that Eragon is a rider, but not much conversation happens before Angela herself walks into the shop. Apparently, Solumbum rarely even shows himself to customers, much less speaks with them. So Angela, because of this, offers to tell Eragon's fortune using knuckle bones of a dragon. The only other person she did this for was a woman by the name of Selena. If you'll remember, that is Eragon's mother's name. Dun dun dun. Eragon agrees to have his fortune told, thinking, if my mother could have her fortune told, then I can stand having my fortune told. And this is what he learned. I'm going to read this off of a list. He will have a long life. There are many choices in his future. There are great battles raging around him. Mighty powers of the land struggling to control his will and destiny. There are countless possibilities of futures, but only one will bring him happiness and peace. He can truly choose his own fate, which is rare. There is a doom upon him, part of which lies in the death that is rapidly approaching. His fate will be to leave the land forever. He will have an epic romance with one who is of a noble birth, who is powerful, wise, and beautiful beyond compare. And there will be betrayal from within his family. Wow. What a fortune, guys. What a fortune. A lot just happened. So yeah, just try to wrap your mind around everything that was just said. Oh, but wait, there's more. As he's leaving, he speaks to Solumbum one more time. And Solumbum says, listen closely and I will tell you two things. When the time comes and you need a weapon, look under the roots of the Manoa tree. Then, when all seems lost and your power is insufficient, go to the rock of Kuthian and speak your name to open the vault of souls. Okay, yeah, so a lot of stuff for Eragon to remember. Saphira and Eragon talk about it, and they decide that Brom does not need to know about his fortune or about anything that was just said. That was for them and them alone. Eragon spent all of 1 week learning how to read. I've had many years to learn how to read, and I'm still sometimes incompetent. Bro, I absolutely love Brom's teaching style. First, it was defend yourself with this stick, and now it's, this is the letter A. Learn it. Love this guy. One night, Eragon has a crazy dream. He saw a young woman bent over by sorrow, chained in a cold, hard cell. A beam of moonlight shone through the barred window, set high in the wall, and fell on her face. A single tear rolled down her cheek, like a liquid diamond. Yeah, just pocket that dream for now. We'll get back to it. Alrighty, folks, the night that we have all been waiting for, the group is going to go sneak in and look at the Seether Oil records. They make it into the building with pretty much no issue, and Brom is able to use magic to unlock the door to the room that they need to get into. The three are quickly looking through any records of Seether Oil and marking down whatever they find. As they're working, Eragon looks up to see a boy just chilling on the windowsill. Don't be alarmed, this is our dear friend Solumbum, and he can apparently shapeshift. Weird cats, am I right? Our dear Solumbum warns Eragon that there are guards coming up to the room. Eragon alerts Brom and Jode of the guards coming, and they are out of there. Mission success. By analyzing their findings, they conclude that the Razac must be living in Dras Leona. And they also mention Hellgrind, which we'll get to, don't you worry. Eragon has no idea what this is, what Hellgrind is, but Jode and Brom do. In the morning, Brom and Eragon say their goodbyes to Jode and they hit the road once more. Eragon admits to eavesdropping like Samwise Gamgee, and he demands answers because, of course he does. And Brom's all like, but if I tell you everything, then you can never live a quiet life. Bruh, he's a dragon rider. He doesn't really have that choice whether you tell him what's going on or not, so you might as well just tell him what's going on. So finally, he kind of fills Eragon in. He says that there is the Varden, who are his friends from earlier, and they are fighting Galbatorix, the king, we know very well by this point. And the thing that he was searching for was a dragon egg. Both the Varden and the Empire's goal is to essentially control the next generation of dragon riders, which Eragon is the first of. There are still 2 other dragon eggs which are currently within Galbatorix's possession. In fact, Saphira's egg was actually once under Galbatorix's possession, but the Varden stole it. But something went amiss, and Brom was actually sent to retrieve the egg, where he ended up fighting Galbatorix's servant, Morzan, and when he killed him, he took his sword. But there's also a funny thing I want to note here. He says, as there had been blood between us before, the hunt for the egg turned into a personal battle. Just pocket that for later. Anyways, like I said, he kills Morzan, takes the sword, and then he actually ends up hiding in Carva Hall, where he was waiting to be summoned by the Varden. Ultimately, Brom tells Eragon that his choices are to 1. Join the Varden and fight against Galbatorix, 2. Flee to Serta, which is outside of the Empire, or 3. Plead for Galbatorix's mercy and join his forces. Those are some grand old options that Eragon has. Brom also just drops another piece of lore. He had met Eragon's mother, and he describes her as being full of dignity and pride, which ended up being her downfall. Okay, lore done, back to your regularly scheduled adventuring. Speaking of adventuring, Eragon sees a footprint, and he's like, oh, I should go investigate it. And as he goes to investigate, he slips and breaks his wrist. But he still investigates the footprint and finds out it's an urgal's footprint. Not good. They race out of there, but 12 urgals are still following them. Eragon, who is riding on Saphira at this point, sees that Brom might be in trouble, and so he lands directly in front of the urgals. The urgals say that their master would like to speak with him. So of course, Eragon responds that the crows can eat their master's entrails. Nice. He raises his hand and beams of light strike the urgals, and then he loses consciousness. Eragon wakes up to find a nice splint on his arm for his broken wrist, and he finds the camp empty, and curious to his companions' whereabouts, he decides to scry them. He finds some water, says the magic words, and boom, an image of Brom flying on Saphira appears. Next, he decides to scry Roran, and Roran is chilling. Like, he doesn't look hurt. However, he can't see Roran's surroundings, which, as you know, means he has never been wherever Roran is. Eragon, who is ever curious, decides to see if he can scry a dream, which honestly, I'm curious too. Let's find out. Turns out, yes, he can see the woman from his dream. She sits up, they lock eyes, and then she collapses. No time to think about it though, because Brom and Saphira are back. And Brom is pissed. Brom says, you made some very bad choices that could have had dangerous repercussions, not the very least of which is that you almost died. Died, Eragon. From now on, you're going to have to think. There's a reason why we are born with brains in our heads and not rocks. I love that quote. Probably one of my favorite quotes. Traveling goes as normal, except Eragon can't use his right hand because it's broken, and so he learns to spar using his left hand. A normal sparring match is occurring when Eragon feels a shift in the fight, and he actually beats Brom. Go him. Alrighty folks, we are nearing closer to the Razac. They have reached Drasleona. Eragon learns that Helgrind, as mentioned earlier, is a mountain that some people low-key worship. And after kind of sneaking around Drasleona for a day, they learn that the Razac are either living at the top of Helgrind or near the base of Helgrind. The next day, Eragon is walking through the city and he stumbles across a slave auction, and he is pissed, rightfully so. He angrily walks away to find himself in front of the cathedral. This cathedral he's kind of been looking at as he's been going throughout Drasleona. It's kind of like a very prominent presence throughout the city. He walks in and kneels before the altar, kind of paying homage to the cathedral itself, but not really to any god in particular. Rising from before the altar, he turns around to see the Razac, followed by a line of soldiers. Yeah, Eragon can't win this one, so he decides to run. So he books it out of the cathedral, he hops a wall, and he contacts Saphira and tells Saphira to tell Brom that they need to get the frick out of there. They book it. They grab their horses, they sprint out, they barely make it out of Drasleona, and they run until night falls. All of the hard work that they put in, tracking the Razac, looking for the seether oil, and going to Drasleona was for nothing. They make camp, and Eragon looks out into the night thinking that he sees something, only for pain to explode in the back of his head and for him to lose consciousness. Guys, this book is so fun. Hello. Unfortunately, my camera battery died, but fear not, I took it as an opportunity to get more tea. Still Jasmine. Anyways, let's hop right back in. Upon waking up, Eragon realizes that he is tied to Brom, which means that Brom must be alive, which is good. However, he cannot use magic. And the Razac know this, that he tried to use magic, so they're like, haha, we drugged ya. The Razac have a bit of a conversation and decide, you know what, they really don't need Brom. So they are about to kill him when Razac shrieks and there's an arrow protruding out of their shoulder. The Razac begin to flee, and one kicks Eragon before he leaves, and the other grabs a knife and throws it at Eragon. Before it hits, Brom jumps in front, and the dagger struck. Eragon wakes up and gets to meet the guy who saved his life. His name is Murtagh, and he also happens to be hunting the Razac. While Eragon was unconscious, Murtagh took the opportunity to bandage some of Brom's wounds, but he couldn't really do much. Eragon then uses magic, which is really cool, to heal the wounds. However, he can only really heal what he can see, or like what he knows of, so he could only heal what's on the surface, so Brom is definitely still internally bleeding. Murtagh asks Eragon if he can join them, and Eragon says, why not? Okay, and then they travel, and they find a cave. Saphira woke Eragon up in a panic. Eragon finds Brom thrashing on the ground. Brom sees Eragon and asks him to bring him the wineskin. When Eragon complies, he tells him to wash his right hand with it. Eragon did so, revealing the Gedwëy Ignasia. I forgot to mention this earlier, but the Gedwëy Ignasia is like the silver mark that was put on Eragon's hand when he first touched Saphira. So, do you know what this means? Brom was a dragon rider. Who saw that coming? Who did? Don't lie. We get a little bit of lore from Brom. Brom was once a dragon rider, and his friend was Morzan. During Morzan's betrayal, there was a battle, and Brom's dragon, Saphira, was killed. Along with this information, he gave Eragon a blessing and beckoned him closer. Very quietly, he whispered 7 words from the ancient language. Then even more softly, he told them what they meant. This is all I can give you. Use them only in great need. Brom blindly turned his eyes to the ceiling, and now, he murmured, for the greatest adventure of all. Contentment spread across the old man's face, and a whisper of breath escaped his lips. And so it was that Brom the storyteller died. I'm not crying, you're crying. You're the one who's crying. They went to the top of the mountain, and Eragon formed a grave for Brom, and on the gravestone he wrote, "Here lies Brom, who was a dragon rider, and like a father to me. May his name live on in glory." This book is sad. The next day, when Eragon asked Murtagh kind of what side he was on, Murtagh said, "I'm neither on the Empire's nor the Varden's side." And Eragon wanted to look a little further, so he tried to get into Murtagh's mind, but found only a wall. Bro knows how to defend his mind. Murtagh asked to see Eragon's sword, and revealed that Zar'roc, Eragon's sword, was once Morzan's sword. So, that's some lore. Speaking of lore, Saphira knew that Brom was a rider. Yeah, from like the first moment that they spoke, yeah, she knew that he was a rider. Saphira reveals that Brom told her many things, most of which is still going to be kept secret. So, you don't get that. But one thing she does reveal is how to find the Varden. Brom told Saphira that to find the Varden, they must first go to Gilead and find the man named Dormnad. So I guess that's their next destination. But first, they must say one final goodbye to Brom. They go to his tomb and say goodbye, and Saphira bends down, touches the grave with her nose, and turns it into diamond. What a little special gift. With a heavy heart, they continue their travels. They stop at a small village, and Eragon sells Kadok, his horse, but keeps Snowfire because Brom promised to take care of Snowfire. More time passed, and so did his 16th birthday. It just came and went. He didn't really tell anyone. He's also had to wear disguises because there are like wanted posters up for him. Eragon and Murtagh continue to spar like Eragon and Brom used to, and Murtagh is actually really good with a blade. They reach Gilead with like no issues, and they form a plan that Murtagh is going to be the one to go in and find Dormnad, and that Eragon and Saphira would just wait outside. So that's what happens. Everything seems to be going as planned. Murtagh tells them that Dormnad will meet them tomorrow and lead them to the Varden, but Murtagh says that once they meet, he's departing. He does not want to go to the Varden. He is very clear about this. Except they're not going to the Varden, because their camp is attacked by urgals, and Eragon, once again, goes unconscious. Eragon awakes in a prison cell, and he can't use magic, so he assumes he's been drugged. A man comes in, brings some food, and he gladly eats it, but he notes he was attacked by urgals. Why are the urgals working with the men? Bored, Eragon looks out the door to the prison soldiers, and he sees them carrying a woman. Not just any woman, the woman from his dreams. And of course, he takes a moment to note that she is, in fact, the fairest woman that he has ever seen. The drug wears off a little bit, so Eragon concludes that the drug must be put in his food and water, and so he decides he's not going to eat or drink anything. Soon he gets a visitor who happens to be a shade. The shade questions Eragon a little bit, and Eragon acts like the drug is working, kind of like he has no idea what's going on. The shade asks for Eragon's name. Not his name, but his true name. So clever Eragon says, Du Sundavar Frior. Frick. I'm pretty sure that I ended by saying that the shade leaves. If I didn't, the shade leaves. Finally, the drug has worn off enough for Eragon to make his great escape. He uses magic to unlock his cell. He steps out, and almost immediately soldiers see him and start charging at him. Luckily, there's a guy who comes to his rescue. Together, they take down all but one soldier and then threaten the soldier to get the location of the woman's cell. They pretty quickly find the woman, and then they start running upstairs, and Murtagh goes and finds the weapons that were stolen from Eragon and the elf, and Eragon grabs a snack because he hasn't eaten in a while. Just as Murtagh says, let's hope the shade doesn't find us, there is a cold chuckle. I'm afraid it's far too late for that. Eragon tells Murtagh that he's going to try to hold the shade off until Saphira can come rescue them. Then they have a short duel, but Zar'roc is knocked from his hands. Just as all hope seems lost, Saphira breaks through the ceiling. This distracts the shade long enough for Murtagh to start shooting arrows at him. An arrow hits him right in between the eyes, and the shade disappears. Dun dun dun. Saphira tears off the rest of the ceiling, dives in, and rescues Eragon, Murtagh, and the elf, and they make their quick escape. As they're flying away, Saphira does sustain a few injuries, which, like an arrow through the wing, sounds crazy painful. Once they are far enough away, Eragon takes a break to heal Saphira's wounds and to also heal the elf's wounds, because, might I remind you, she had been tortured, like, for a long time. So she has sustained quite a few injuries, but again, he can only kind of heal what's on the surface. He also finally connects the dots that the urgals are working for Galbatorix. Well, Eragon and Murtagh still don't know where the Varden is, and they have an elf who's dying, so they kind of need to plan a course of action. They decide to go through part of the Hatterack Desert to reach the Bure Mountains. But there's a slight problem. There's no water in a desert. It's kind of like part of being a desert. Besides the ocean, I get it, okay? So Eragon learns this fancy little trick of pulling water out from the ground. Like, he can feel the moisture within the dirt and sand and can, like, pull it out, which is cool. So that's how they're going to cross the desert, is he just always has water available to him as long as he has magic. At one point, they hit a river, and Saphira has to carry the horses over, and poor Tornak is Murtagh's horse, by the way. Poor Tornak was freaking out. They've been traveling for quite a long time at a really fast pace, and Eragon's like, why isn't this elf awake? Why isn't she awake? So he has the fun idea, which is actually low-key really smart, to try to talk to her through his mind. He tries to reach out to her and then immediately is attacked. Not knowing what to do, he says in the ancient language, I am a rider and a friend. I think I forgot to mention this, but if you are speaking the ancient language, you cannot lie. You can kind of work around your words. That's what the elves do. But, like, you cannot lie. So that causes the elf to trust him, and she opens up her mind and they have a little bit of a conversation. She tells him that her name is Arya. She is an elf. She works with the Varden, and she has a poison that's kind of like working its way through her body. And the only way she hasn't died yet is because she's in this like coma, self-induced coma, and she is quickly losing strength. So unless she gets Tunavor's nectar soon, she is going to die. So now he knows the cure. So he just needs to know how to get to the Varden. So he asks for the location of the Varden, and she basically says, do you promise in the ancient language that you won't reveal it to Galbatorix? And he agrees in the ancient language. And so then she like shows him with her mind, like he can see the path that he needs to take to the Varden, which is cool. And they are within the Bior Mountains. So when he gets to the certain waterfall, he has to hit a rock on the wall and then say a bunch of words from the ancient language, and they will let him in. So now it's just kind of a race against the clock. She also says, don't contact me again because I will die. But if all hope seems lost and you don't think I'll make it before we reach the Varden, then contact me one more time because I have some important stuff that you need to know. As they continue to make their way towards the Varden, they come across a group of people on horses. These people are slavers. Unfortunately for them, they didn't realize that they're up against a dragon rider, and so all of them flee once they see Saphira. Their leader, Tokenbrand, falls to the ground. He's completely helpless. And before Eragon can stop him, Murtagh kills him. This makes Eragon so angry. And Murtagh doesn't understand. But Eragon's like, he was helpless. It would have been different if he could fight back, but he was completely helpless and you just killed him. And Murtagh's like, well, you haven't had my life. I kind of have to kill people or else I'm in huge trouble. They continue to make their way towards the Varden, towards the Bior Mountains, and they see urgals are following them. And these urgals are going like really fast. They are catching up with them quite quickly. So they keep racing. Like, guys, it's a race against the clock for many reasons. Also, one thing I forgot to mention, these mountains are huge. Like, you can't see the top, huge. And Eragon and Saphira decide to fly as far up as they can. And they're flying, and suddenly it gets a little difficult to breathe, and Eragon blacks out. So they discover that the air gets thin when you go up really high. Not knowing what else they can do to help, Eragon and Saphira start dropping rocks on the urgals who are very closely following them. They are getting closer and closer to the waterfall, but the urgals are gaining closer and closer to them. Eragon starts talking to Murtagh, and Murtagh is like, all right, we are almost at the waterfall. I need to leave you. Is there a way out? And Eragon says no. And Murtagh gets real angry. And honestly, I understand. Murtagh this whole time had been saying, I don't want to go to the Varden. I don't want to go to the Varden. Like, they won't like me. No one likes me. Don't let me go to the Varden. Promise that you'll find a way out. And he is trapped. Murtagh says, I warned you that I wouldn't go to the Varden, but you went ahead and trapped me between a hammer and an anvil. You're the one with the elf's memories. Why didn't you tell me it was a dead end? And Eragon's like, okay, what is so important that you can't go to the Varden? Why is this so important to you? And Murtagh drops some crazy lore and says, you have the right to know. I am the son of Morzan, first and last of the Forsworn. Dun, dun, dun. That's tea. I'm funny. They argue for a little bit, but ultimately there's no choice. They have to go to the Varden because the urgals are very, very quickly gaining on them. Once they reach the waterfall, Eragon takes a rock and starts saying the ancient words, but nothing's happening. They realize they're on the wrong side of the waterfall. And the urgals begin to attack. They quickly try to make their way to the other side of the waterfall when Eragon is pushed under the water and he starts drowning. Luckily, a hand reaches and pulls him out of the water. And it's a dwarf. That's right, a dwarf pulled him out of the water, and there is a man holding a knife to Murtagh's throat. They go into the mountain with the Varden. So this part really annoys me. So there's this bald man, and they literally just call him Bald Man. Like, he doesn't have a name. And Eragon tries to tell him about Arya, and he keeps saying, we have an elf, like she's injured, and the bald man keeps saying, shut up, like you need to be examined before we can trust you to talk. Finally, the dwarf, who we learn is named Auric, we love Auric, steps in and is like, bro, there's an elf, like, listen to this dude. So Auric takes the elf and they are away. The bald man is like, okay, let's examine you then. So the bald man goes into Eragon's mind and looks through all of his memories, like from childhood till present day. Honestly, he's 15, so he's not terribly old, but still. And Eragon and Saphira hide certain things from him, like Murtagh's identity, certain conversations with Brom, his fortune that was foretold by Angela. Ultimately, the bald man's like, fine, you're okay, like whatever. He turns to Murtagh, all right, you're next. And Murtagh is not having it. He's like, my mind is my last sanctuary. It's the one place I don't let people in. No. The bald man is extremely frustrated, but there's not much that he can do. So ultimately, they leave Saphira, Eragon, and Murtagh alone in a room, and they're the three wait to be summoned. Since they're in the room and they have all the time in the world, Eragon's like, hey, what's your life story? And Murtagh's like, fine, I'll tell you. Basically, Murtagh had a rough childhood. Morzan did not love Murtagh's mother, but they had a child. For 3 years, he was separated from his mother, but she was allowed to visit, like, every so often. And one time, Morzan got really frustrated and chucked Zar'roc at him so that he has a huge scar across his back. Then eventually when Brom killed Morzan, Murtagh went with Galbatorix and was then cared for by Galbatorix's men. But Galbatorix mainly left him alone until his 18th birthday. Murtagh was summoned to have dinner with Galbatorix. After dinner, Galbatorix was like, hey, my world is low-key paradise. Like, I want peace and prosperity, and I want you to help me with that. And Murtagh's like, heck yeah, peace and prosperity, let's do it. And so he agrees, and again, Galbatorix kind of leaves him alone until a few months later, he is summoned. And when Murtagh speaks to Galbatorix the next time, there is no charming aspect about the king. There is no peace and prosperity. Galbatorix told Murtagh to destroy a city, and Murtagh said, well, how do we know if some of the people there are innocent? And Galbatorix responded, they're all traitors, burn them at the stake and bury their ashes with dung. Murtagh tried to escape with the person who taught him how to sword fight. His name was Tornak, which is who he named his horse after. But while trying to escape, Tornak was killed. And since then, Murtagh has been hunting down the Razac. After telling him his life story, they kind of just go to bed, and then the bald man comes in and tells them to get on their horses and to follow him. And they walk for quite a while, until eventually the bald man tells Eragon to get onto Saphira and opens the doors. They were inside a massive volcanic crater. Its walls narrowed to a small ragged opening so high above that Eragon could not judge the distance. It might have been more than a dozen miles. A soft beam of light fell through the aperture, illuminating the crater's center, though it left the rest of the cavernous expanse in a hushed twilight. The crater's far side, hazy blue in the distance, looked to be nearly 10 miles away. Giant icicles, hundreds of feet thick and thousands of feet long, hung leagues above them like glistening daggers. Eragon knew from his experience in the valley that no one, not even Saphira, could reach those lofty points. So yeah, it's really pretty, but he enters this place and the crowd starts cheering. And then Saphira lets out a little puff of smoke and the crowd starts cheering even more. So they're kind of being shown off. The place that they're in is Trondheim, the city mountain built from the purest marble. They're walking for quite a while and then they enter into another large room. And it says, the ceiling was capped by a dawn-red star sapphire of monstrous size. The jewel was 20 yards across and nearly as thick. Its face had been carved to resemble a rose in full bloom, and so skilled was the craftsmanship, the flower almost seemed to be real. And you learn that this jewel is called the Isidar Mithrim. After more walking, they make their way to a study, Ajahad's study. Ajahad is the leader of the Varden, and when they walk into the study, there is another bald man, identical to the first bald man. In fact, they are twins, and neither of them have names, like legitimately. They're both just the twins, or the bald men. Ajahad addresses Murtagh and says, because you were not examined, we can't trust you. And Murtagh says, you wouldn't trust me anyway. Ajahad's face darkened as Murtagh spoke, and his eyes flashed dangerously. So Ajahad immediately recognized him as Morzan's son. After 5 words, he was like, oh, that's Morzan's son. So he was like, yeah, take this guy away, please. Anyways, Eragon and Ajahad have a lovely conversation. Eragon recounts his tale of how he ended up a dragon rider, and he gets to the part about the shade, and Ajahad is like, wait, I know that shade. His name's Durza. Yeah, you didn't kill him, or Murtagh didn't kill him. The only thing that can actually kill him is if you stab him through the heart. So, or I guess if you pierce his heart. So unfortunately, the shade is still out there. He also talks about kind of the history of Saphira's egg, how she was being ferried back and forth between the elves and humans, hoping that one day it would hatch. And the last time Arya was trying to ferry the egg to the elves, she was captured by Durza. And also the location of the elves is like pretty darn secret. But Ajahad's like, yeah, they live in Dueldonvarden. So like we know the general area, but not the specific spot. But he's found out like, yeah, I know where they live. They live in Dueldonvarden. They also have a beautiful conversation about how all the forces want to control him, how the elves will want to control Eragon, how the Varden will, how the dwarves will, and how Galbatorix will. One of the last things that Ajahad says is that he received Brom's message a while back along with his ring, and he gave the ring to Eragon, saying that Brom would probably want him to have it. Shortly after that, Oric the dwarf is called in, and Ajahad is like, bro, you disobeyed a direct order. And this is where we learn that Oric had actually been ordered to not help Eragon when he was being crushed by the waterfall, and Oric went against direct orders and saved Eragon. Because of that, he must be punished. So his punishment is that he can no longer train or fight. However, he has a new assignment, which is to show Eragon and Saphira around. So let's just say Oric was pretty happy because his punishment should have been death, but Ajahad let him off the hook. So Oric does just that. He lets Eragon have a bath. He shows them the dragon hold. Speaking of which, the dragon hold is like really, really, really far up. And it's like there's a huge staircase to get there. And there's also a slide that's next to it, which is so fun. I want to go sliding on that slide. But it was designed so that the dwarves could get down really quickly. But Eragon is also advised to not go down it because he could get seriously injured. And as they're walking around, people keep calling Eragon Ajelam, and this means silver hand, and it's a name that they used to like always call the riders, which is so cool. And so as they're walking, there's this woman that keeps asking him to bless the baby. So instead of like just, I don't know, kissing the baby or something, he like says words of power like with the ancient language over the baby, and then Saphira like kisses the baby's temple, so now the baby has like a mark on her head. What did you do? Eragon asked Saphira softly. I gave her hope. You gave her a future. That's cute. For the first time in a long time, Eragon and Saphira can sleep peacefully that night. The next morning he awakes and he kind of takes a breath and is like, oh, this is nice. And then he looks over, and who does he see? It's none other than Solumbum, this crazy little weircat. So Solumbum leads him to Angela, and Eragon's like, Angela, how did you, what? Why and how are you here? And Angela's like, well, I like to be where important events are happening. Just please don't tell anyone I'm here. Like, I'd rather people didn't know. And he and Angela have a little discussion about Brom. And she says, he was chosen as a rider, but his dragon was killed. He loved a woman, but it was his affection that was her undoing. And he was chosen, I assume, to guard and train you, but in the end, he failed at that as well. The only thing he succeeded at was killing Morzan, and a better deed he couldn't have done. Brom loved a woman? More lore? We also learned that Angela must be, like, seriously powerful, because Eragon was like, well, did the twins have to test your mind, like examine you? And she said, oh, they'd love to, but they know that the effort would leave them broken and gibbering nonsense. So she must be like pretty darn powerful. Solumbum leads Eragon back upstairs, and Oric is there. And Oric is like, hey, Hrothgar, like the king of the dwarves, really wishes to see you, so let's go. So they had to go see Hrothgar. I only took a couple notes on this conversation. One, they talk about Eragon's purpose and what he plans on doing when the war is over, what he plans to do with the Varden, like everything with that. Two, we learn that Oric is his nephew. Three, I just wrote down, please don't bless babies. Hrothgar's like, I would advise you don't do that again. We learn that the dwarves themselves are a little, like, unstable. Like, the clans are pretty divided. So yeah, that's all that we kind of learn about the dwarves and about Hrothgar. He seems like a pretty chill dude. Like, I low-key vibe with Hrothgar. From there, Eragon goes to the library, and he's just chilling when none other than the twins walk in front of him. They tell him that they are part of a magic group called Duvrangar, and that they wish for him to join this little magical group. He says that he will give them an answer tomorrow. He makes his way back upstairs to the dragon hold, and there's another person there to meet him. Wow, he is talking to so many people today. The person who wants to talk to him is a young woman named Nasuada. She is the daughter of Ajahad. I like Nasuada, okay? She's cool. Nasuada can't stay for long, but she tells Eragon that, number one, please don't bless babies. Probably should not have done that. 2, Murtagh wishes to see him. And 3, Arya is recovering quite well. So all pretty much good news. And then she departs pretty quickly. So a day passes and it is time for Eragon to be tested with what he knows about swordplay. So he goes to like the training area, and this very nice guy, this very lovely dwarf named Frederick, is very excited to see what Eragon can do. But just as he is about to start kind of testing Eragon, the twins walk in. He tells the twins, yeah, I don't want to be part of your magic group, whatever. And they're like, okay, fine. Prepare to be tested. Magic tested. He goes through a series of tests. They start out pretty simple, and then they progressively get more and more difficult. Eragon kind of realizes, oh, they want to know words from the ancient language that they might not know, that I know. So he starts completing the tasks in the simplest way possible, using the simplest words. After many, many tests, the twins are like, all right, you just have one more test. It's really easy. You should be able to do it. And then they hold up like I think it's a ring. We need you to like bring out the essence of silver. And he's like, the what? Like, Brom never taught me this one. So he's about to release some magic when a voice steps in and says, shame. And this voice is none other than Arya. Our girlie is awake and she is alive and she is better than ever. And she's like, shame on you twins for telling him to do something that you can't even do. Only a master can do this. And then she summons the essence of silver. Then Arya says, I claim the right of trial by arms. Draw your sword. And Eragon's like, oh shoot, she wants to duel me, okay. And then he's like, I'll go easy on her. Like, she was just asleep for like a really long time after being tortured. Like, she's probably pretty weak. I'll go easy. She is fast, she is strong, and she is better at swordplay than he is. He kind of shows off a series of moves that he knows just to kind of show her what he can do. But ultimately, he loses. Saphira says, you find her form pleasing, do you not? Okay, Saphira, okay. So he goes and talks with Arya, and Arya essentially tells him, thank you. You saved my life. You saved me from going before Galbatorix. Like, I owe you one, dude. Like, you completely saved me. They continue talking, and Eragon brings up that the ring that Brom gave him and the tattoo that Arya has both have the same symbol. And she tells him, first of all, don't tell anyone about my tattoo. Second of all, whoever has that symbol is a true friend of the elves. Eragon's like, oh, I probably shouldn't be carrying it then. And Arya's like, no, keep it. It could be useful. Their conversation ends, and so Eragon decides to go visit Murtagh. Eragon expects Murtagh to not be in a good mood and to be locked up in like a terrible cell, but it says, actually, I expected the same thing, but Ajahad lets me have all this as long as I don't cause trouble. And they bring me huge meals as well as anything I want from the library. If I'm not careful, I'll turn into a fat scholar. Murtagh is content to just live his life for now, take a break from, always being on the run. Yeah, so Eragon's had a pretty busy day. He goes to bed, and is ready for a nice long night of sleep. Too bad. He is awoken by a dwarf and is quickly led to a room where Auric, Arya, Ajahad, and Ajahad's second Jormander are. Jormander sounds like a Pokemon. I don't mean to insult anyone named Jormander. Ajahad tells the group that there are urgals that are coming through the tunnels that are like underneath the mountain, and that's not good. So Ajahad and Hrothgar decided that the best course of action would be to have Eragon and Arya and some dwarves collapse a bunch of the tunnels so that they can kind of direct the urgals where they want them to go, and then to just be ready to fight. Oh, and also they're evacuating the women and the children along with Nasuada, and she is not happy about it. At some point too, Eragon's like, Arya, are you fighting or are you gonna go like flee with the women and children? And Arya's like, no, I'm gonna stay and fight. And Eragon's like, oh, she's stronger than all of you. What are you talking about? Of course she's gonna stay and fight. Anyways, Eragon gets to work collapsing a bunch of tunnels. I think he does over 6. I think like he collapses quite a few tunnels using magic. And afterwards, Auric gives Eragon and Saphira a gift from Hrothgar, and it is a set of armor for the both of them, which is very helpful for the upcoming battle. As they're preparing for battle, they see Murtagh walk up to them, and they're like, Murtagh, who the heck let you out? And Murtagh's like, no, Ajahad did. And they're all like, and Murtagh's like, well, what harm can I cause? Ajahad thinks we just need another fighter, so here I am. The battle has begun. In fact, Arya says it has begun, very much like Theoden does in The Lord of the Rings. Men and dwarves both rush to help in the fight. Orc's fighting, Arya's fighting, everyone's fighting. And throughout the battle, the twins are communicating with Eragon on where he should be, like where he can be helpful. So at one point, the twins are like, go help Hrothgar, he needs you. And so they fly over and help him over there. I should also mention, a lot of these urgals aren't ordinary urgals. They're specific urgals called Kol, and they're like the bigger, stronger, more deadly versions of urgals. Eragon tried to attack one of these Kol, and the Kol was not having it. It attacked right back, and Eragon took a hit to the head, but was saved by Angela, who winked at him and then dashed away. Because of course Angela's helping. Hope began to decrease, and every time Eragon killed an urgal, there was always another urgal. He was tired, he was hurt, but the twins tell him that they need to collapse more tunnels, so there he and Arya go to collapse more tunnels. But when they reach the dragon hold, the twins aren't where they're supposed to be, so Eragon decides to go down the slide that I mentioned earlier. You know, instead of the super long staircase, he just slid down the slide, and he safely made it to the bottom. He continued to try to contact the twins, but there was nothing. And then, out of the tunnel, emerged a man. A shade. Durza. And Durza says, I don't see your friend Murtagh here to help you. Durza attacks Eragon both physically and mentally, and they're kind of having a battle back and forth, both physically and mentally. And at one point, Eragon accidentally taps into Durza's mind, and he kind of gets different bits and pieces from Durza's childhood, but he was drawn out of these memories by a sword slashing his back. He pretty much lost all hope at that point, and he looked up at the Isidar Mithram, which is that gem from earlier, when a flash of light erupted, and the gem shattered. From the hole in the ceiling flew down Saphira and Arya. Durza looked up to see what had happened, and Eragon saw his chance. All his pain and rage focused on one word: Brazinger. Zar'roc blazed with a bloody light, heatless flame running along it. He lunged forward and stabbed Durza in the heart. Durza looked down with shock at the blade protruding from his breast. His mouth was open, but instead of words, an unearthly howl burst from him. His sword dropped from nerveless fingers. He grasped Zar'roc as if to pull it out, but it was lodged firmly in him. Then Durza's skin turned transparent. And then, once again, Eragon loses consciousness. While he's asleep, he gets a mix of memories. Some of them are the Shade's memories, some of them are his own memories, and then he hears a voice. First, he kind of recoiled at having another consciousness in his mind, but he realized that this person was kind of soothing the pain and helping him out, and so he asks, "Who are you?" He replied that he is the morning sage and the cripple who is whole. He says that he has answers for Eragon and that he needs him to come to him. Eragon's like, "Okay, but where in the world are you?" And this guy says, "Well, go with Arya to Elismira. There you will find me." "It is time for you to rest, Eragon. When you wake, do not speak of me to anyone. Remember, you must go to the elves. Now sleep." He raised a hand, as if in benediction, and peace crept through Eragon. His last thought was that Brom would have been proud of him. Stop! I miss Brom. Eragon awakes to Angela. Who else? Angela had been kind of healing him alongside Arya and Murtagh, who come in and kind of explain what's been going on. When Durza died, the urgals fled, so there wasn't too much more need to fight. Also, Saphira blew fire, which is new. That's a new development of hers, so go her. Also, Murtagh is very excited because Eragon and Murtagh now have matching scars across their back. Isn't that so cute? At the end of the book, Eragon closes his eyes and thinks of the man who spoke to him, the cripple who is whole. "Come to me, Eragon, for I have answers to all you ask." A measure of peace and satisfaction consoled Eragon. "I will come." End of book 1 of the inheritance cycle. We did it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for hanging out with me today. I'm sure this video is crazy long. I have this thing where I hate leaving details out because to me everything's important. During this summary, I definitely teased this book a lot, but I really do have crazy fond memories of the series. I love this series so much. I even have a signed copy. Like, I'm low-key obsessed with this series. And please let me know if you would like to see a summary of the second book, Eldest, and so on. I would love to do another summary like this. Please consider giving this video a like, as it took a decent amount of effort to make. Until next time, may your sword stay sharp. Gosh, I love this book.